The village that Japan erased from the map. Episode 1, The Photograph. There is a place in the mountains of Japan that does not appear on ordinary maps. A village hidden deep inside a forest. A village called Kurakami. For centuries, people lived there in complete isolation. They grew rice, they raised animals, they worshipped at an ancient temple, and they followed one rule. A rule every child in Kurakami learned before they could even write their own name. Never answer the bell after midnight. Nobody knew who created the rule. Nobody knew what would happen if someone broke it. But everyone knew one thing. The villagers were terrified of the bell. In the winter of 2024, an American documentary filmmaker named Daniel Carter traveled to Japan. Daniel had spent years investigating mysterious places around the world, abandoned hospitals, missing person cases, unexplained disappearances. But Japan was different. There were stories about forests where people vanished, tunnels that appeared on no maps, and villages that had supposedly disappeared overnight. One afternoon, while searching through an old antique shop in Nagano, Daniel found something unusual. A photograph. It showed a small Japanese village surrounded by mountains. About 30 people stood outside an old wooden building. Men, women, children. Everyone was looking directly at the camera, except one little girl. She stood at the back of the group and she was staring into the forest. Daniel bought the photograph. That night he scanned it and enlarged the image. Then he noticed something disturbing. Behind the little girl stood a tall man dressed in black. Daniel zoomed in. The man's face was almost impossible to see, but his shadow was clearly visible, and his shadow was pointing in the wrong direction. Daniel searched the name of the village written on the back of the photograph. The name was Kurakami. He searched online. Nothing. No village, no tourist information, no modern photographs, no government records, nothing. It was as if Kurakami had never existed. Daniel became obsessed. The next morning, he showed the photograph to an elderly Japanese shopkeeper. The old man's face immediately changed. He stared at the little girl. Then he whispered, "Where did you find this?" Daniel told him. The old man slowly shook his head. "You shouldn't be looking for Kurakami." Daniel asked why. The old man looked toward the mountains. Then he said something that Daniel would never forget, because that village doesn't want to be found. Daniel looked at the photograph again. The little girl was still staring into the forest, but this time, Daniel noticed something different. She was smiling. And on the back of the photograph, beneath the word Kurakami, 3 new words had appeared, words that had not been there before. "Come find me." To be continued. The next morning, Daniel returned to the antique shop, but the elderly shopkeeper was gone. The door was locked, the windows were covered, and there was no sign that anyone had been there. Daniel asked several people nearby about the old man. Nobody knew who he was. One woman told Daniel something strange. "That shop has been empty for years." Daniel didn't believe her. He showed her the photograph. The woman immediately stepped away. "Don't ask about that village." Daniel asked why. She refused to answer, but before walking away, she whispered one word: Nagano. Daniel spent the rest of the day searching old records. Finally, he found a hand-drawn map inside an old Japanese book. There, hidden between 2 mountains, was a name: Kurakami. Next to it was a small black symbol. It looked like a bell. Daniel copied the location and rented a car. The road into the mountains was almost completely abandoned. There were no houses, no shops, no other vehicles, only trees. The higher Daniel drove, the thicker the fog became. His phone lost its signal, then his GPS stopped working. Daniel continued anyway. After several hours, he reached an old wooden bridge. On the other side stood a weathered sign. The Japanese characters were almost impossible to read, but Daniel recognized the name, Kurakami. He stopped the car. For several seconds, he simply stared at the sign. Then he noticed something. There was no road behind him anymore. Daniel turned around. The road he had just traveled had disappeared beneath a thick wall of trees. He tried to start the car. Nothing. Again, nothing. Then he heard a sound. A bell. Ding. Daniel froze. He looked at his watch. 11:47 p.m. The old shopkeeper's warning suddenly came back to him. Never answer the bell after midnight. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of the car. He followed a narrow trail through the forest. The fog became thicker. Then through the trees he saw lights. Dozens of them. Daniel walked closer, and suddenly The forest ended. Below him was a village, wooden houses, stone paths, old lanterns glowing beside the streets. A temple stood in the center, and behind the village was a massive mountain covered in darkness. Daniel knew immediately. He had found Kurakami. But something was wrong. The village looked completely normal. There were lights in the windows. Smoke rose from several chimneys, yet nobody was outside. Daniel walked down the main street. He approached the first house. He knocked once, twice. A woman's voice came from inside. "Who are you?" Daniel introduced himself. There was a long silence. Then the woman asked, "How did you get here?" "I followed the road." The woman suddenly became frightened. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "There is no road to Kurakami." Daniel looked behind him. The forest was gone. The path had disappeared. Then every light in the village went out. Complete darkness surrounded him. And somewhere inside the village, a bell began to ring. Ding. Daniel looked at his watch. 11:59 p.m. 1 minute remained until midnight. Then a little girl's voice whispered from somewhere behind him. Daniel, he slowly turned around. Nobody was there. The voice whispered again. "Don't let them see you." Ding. The clock struck midnight, and every door in Kurakami opened at exactly the same time. To be continued. Episode The Midnight Rule. Every door in Kurakami opened at exactly midnight. Daniel stood frozen in the middle of the street. Behind the doors were people. Men, women, children. All of them were staring at him. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then an elderly man stepped outside. He walked toward Daniel carrying a small lantern. "My name is Hiroshi," he said. Daniel asked him what was happening. Hiroshi looked at the clock hanging above the village temple. "You're not supposed to be here. I found your village by accident." Hiroshi shook his head. "No one finds Kurakami by accident." Daniel showed him the photograph. The old man's face immediately changed. "Where did you get this?" "Nagano." Hiroshi stared at the little girl. "Aiko. You know her?" Hiroshi looked toward the dark forest. "Everyone in this village knows her." Daniel asked who she was. Hiroshi didn't answer. Instead, he took Daniel to an old wooden house. Inside, there was a small room with no windows. "You can sleep here tonight." Daniel looked at the door. "Why can't I leave?" Hiroshi was silent. Then he said, "Because the road will return in the morning." Daniel asked what he meant. Hiroshi looked directly into his eyes. "If you hear a bell tonight, do not open this door." "Why?" "Because something will come looking for you." Hiroshi left. Daniel locked the door. For several hours, nothing happened. Then at exactly 2:13 a.m., he heard footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Someone was walking through the snow. The footsteps stopped outside his room. Daniel held his breath. Then came 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. A little girl's voice whispered, "Daniel." His heart began racing. He didn't answer. "Daniel, I'm cold." He moved closer to the door. Then the voice whispered, "Please let me in." Daniel looked through a tiny crack. A little girl stood outside. She wore the same clothes as the girl in the photograph. Aiko. She slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were completely black. Daniel stepped backward. Then she smiled. "I know you have my photograph." Daniel froze. Aiko placed one hand against the door and whispered, "You came here because you wanted the truth." The bell rang. Ding. Aiko disappeared. Daniel opened the door. The hallway was empty. But on the floor was something that hadn't been there before. A photograph. Daniel picked it up. It showed Kurakami. But the photograph was different. There were now 31 people standing in front of the village. And Daniel was standing among them. To be continued, episode 4, The Children Who Disappeared. The next morning, Daniel showed the photograph to Hiroshi. The old man didn't say anything. He simply walked outside. Daniel followed him to the village temple. Inside, Hiroshi opened an ancient wooden cabinet. Hundreds of names were carved into the walls. Daniel asked what they were. "The missing people." Hiroshi nodded. "Children mostly." Daniel looked closer. The names continued for hundreds of years. Then he saw one familiar name. Aiko Nakamura, 1997. Daniel looked at Hiroshi. "You told me everyone knew her." Hiroshi nodded. "Because everyone remembers the night she disappeared." "What happened?" Hiroshi took a deep breath. "Every 27 years something comes to Kurakami." "What? We don't know." "Then why do you sacrifice children?" Hiroshi looked shocked. "You think we choose them?" Daniel said nothing. Hiroshi pointed toward the mountain. "The mountain chooses." According to the village records, every 27 years, the village bell rang 13 times after midnight. When the final bell rang, one child would disappear. But in 1997, something went wrong. Aiko was chosen. The villagers tried to stop the ritual. They locked her inside the temple. But when the final bell rang, Aiko disappeared. No door was opened. No window was broken. She simply vanished. Daniel asked, "What happened after that?" Hiroshi looked toward the forest. "She came back." "When?" "3 nights later." Daniel stared at him. "What did she say?" Hiroshi's voice became quiet. "She said the village had been lying to us." Daniel asked what that meant. Hiroshi pointed toward the floor. "She said there was something underneath the temple." That night, Daniel returned to the temple. He searched the floor. Behind an old altar, he found a hidden wooden door. He opened it. A staircase descended into darkness. Daniel turned on his flashlight. The walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them. Every photograph showed Kurakami. Different years, different generations, but one thing never changed. Aiko. She appeared in every photograph, always 9 years old. Daniel picked up a photograph from 1897. Aiko was there, another from 1924. Aiko was there, another from 1970. Aiko was there. Then Daniel found a photograph dated 2024. His hands began shaking. The photograph showed Daniel standing inside the underground tunnel. But he was holding something, a small black key. Daniel looked down. There was something in his hand. A key. He didn't remember picking it up. Then he heard a voice behind him. "Don't open the door." Daniel turned. Aiko was standing at the end of the tunnel. She whispered, "Whatever you do, don't open the black door." To be continued. Episode 5, The Black Door. Daniel followed Aiko through the underground tunnel. The deeper they went, the colder it became. The walls were covered with strange symbols. Some looked hundreds of years old, others looked almost modern. Finally, they reached a massive stone door. It was completely black, no handle, no lock. Only one symbol was carved into it. A bell. Daniel asked Aiko, "What is behind this door?" She didn't answer. Daniel held up the key. "You said not to open it." Aiko nodded. "Because once it opens, something comes through." "What?" She looked at him. "I don't know." Daniel stepped closer to the door. "Then why did you bring me here?" Aiko looked sad. "Because you already opened it." Daniel froze. "What?" Aiko pointed it at the wall. There was a photograph. It showed Daniel standing in front of the black door. The door was open. Daniel looked at the date, 2024. "But this hasn't happened," Aiko whispered. "It has." Suddenly, the ground shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. The black door made a deep cracking sound. Daniel stepped backward. A thin line of darkness appeared between the stones. Then came a sound from the other side. A bell. Ding! Aiko screamed, "Run!" Daniel ran. Behind him, something began pounding against the door. Boom! Boom! The entire tunnel shook. Daniel reached the stairs. Then he heard a voice. His own voice. "Daniel!" He stopped. He turned around. Aiko was gone. The black door was open. And standing inside the doorway was another Daniel. The other man looked exactly like him. Same face, same clothes, same scar on his hand, but his eyes were completely black. The other Daniel smiled. "You shouldn't have come here." Daniel ran. He reached the temple. Hiroshi was waiting. The old man looked terrified. "You opened it." Daniel shook his head. "I didn't." Hiroshi stared at him. "Then why is it open?" Daniel looked toward the mountain. "I don't know," Hiroshi whispered. "Because the village isn't trying to keep something inside." Daniel stared at him. Hiroshi continued, "It is trying to keep something out." To be continued. Episode 6, The Other Side. The village changed after the black door opened. The sky became darker. The mountains disappeared beneath thick fog. The villagers stopped speaking. Some began boarding up their windows. Others packed their belongings. Daniel asked Hiroshi where they were going. Hiroshi answered, "Nowhere." Daniel didn't understand. Hiroshi explained that nobody could leave Kurakami after the black door opened. The village had become trapped. Then Daniel saw something outside. A man was walking down the street. It was him, the other Daniel. The villagers closed their doors. The other Daniel stopped in front of the temple. He looked directly at Daniel. Then he smiled. Daniel asked Hiroshi, "What is that thing?" Hiroshi whispered, "The village calls them echoes." "What are echoes?" "People who came through the black door." "Are they human?" Hiroshi shook his head. "They know everything you know. Your memories, your fears, your voice. but they aren't you. Daniel looked at the other version of himself. What does it want? Hiroshi said. Your place. That night, Daniel stayed inside the temple. He couldn't sleep. Then he heard his mother's voice. Daniel. He opened his eyes. His mother had died when he was a teenager. He heard her again. Daniel, it's me. He knew it wasn't real, but the voice sounded exactly like her. Then came another voice, his father's, then his childhood friends, people from his past, all calling his name. Daniel covered his ears. Suddenly, the temple doors opened. The other Daniel walked inside. You know what I want, he said. Daniel stepped backward. Stay away from me. The echo smiled. I don't want to hurt you. Then what do you want? I want to live, Daniel asked. Where? The echo pointed toward the mountains. Your world. Then Aiko appeared behind him. She looked at the echo. You're lying. The echo turned. For the first time, the smile disappeared from his face. Aiko whispered, You don't belong here. The echo suddenly screamed. Every window in the temple shattered. Daniel fell to the floor, and for 1 second he saw what was behind the echo. Not a human body, not a ghost, something enormous, something ancient, something that had been waiting beneath the mountain for hundreds of years. To be continued. Episode 7, Aiko's Secret. Daniel woke up beneath the temple. Aiko was sitting beside him. The village was silent. Daniel asked her, What are you? Aiko looked down. I was a girl. Once. Daniel asked what happened to her. Aiko finally told him the truth. In 1997, the village elders chose her. They believed sacrificing one child would protect everyone else. Aiko was taken beneath the temple, but when she reached the black door, she refused to enter. Instead, she opened it. On the other side, she saw something impossible, a world without time, a world filled with copies of people. Every person who entered was replaced by an echo. Aiko escaped, but she couldn't return to her own time. She became trapped between worlds. That's why she remained 9 years old. Daniel asked, Why did you call me here? Aiko looked at him. Because I need your help. With what? Closing the door, Daniel looked toward the tunnel. How? Aiko pointed to the key. The key doesn't open the door. It closes it. Daniel stared at the key. Then why did you bring me here? Because only someone from outside Kurakami can use it. Daniel realized something. The old shopkeeper, the photograph, the road, everything had been leading him here. Aiko nodded. The village needed someone from the outside. Daniel asked, What happens if I close the door? Aiko didn't answer. What happens to you? She looked away. I disappear. Daniel shook his head. No. Aiko smiled sadly. I've been waiting for this for 27 years. Suddenly, the village bell rang once, twice, 3 times. Hiroshi ran into the temple. It's beginning. Daniel asked what was happening. Hiroshi looked terrified. The final ritual. How many bells? 13. Daniel looked at Aiko. What happens at 13? She whispered. The mountain chooses someone. The bell rang again. Ding, 4, ding, 5. Daniel looked at the black door. Then he heard footsteps behind him. The echo had returned. And this time, he wasn't alone. To be continued. Episode 8, 13 bells. The entire village was surrounded. Dozens of echoes stood between the houses. Some looked like villagers, some looked like children, some looked like people who had disappeared decades ago, and among them stood another Daniel. The village bell continued ringing. 6, 7, 8. Daniel held the key tightly. Aiko told him, Once the 13th bell rings, the door will stay open forever. Daniel asked, How much time do we have? Aiko looked toward the temple. 3 minutes. Daniel and Hiroshi ran toward the underground tunnel. The echoes followed. Daniel reached the black door. The other Daniel appeared behind him. You can't close it. Daniel turned. Why? The echo smiled. Because you don't understand what is on the other side. The echo pointed toward the door. Your world is dying. Daniel stared at him. You expect me to believe that? I've seen it. You've seen the future? No. The echo smiled. I've seen every possible future. The black door began glowing. Daniel saw images, cities burning, wars, floods, people running through empty streets. Then another vision appeared. His own apartment, his own life, his own future. Everything Daniel had ever wanted. Aiko grabbed his arm. Don't look. Daniel pulled away. The echo whispered, Stay here. I can give you everything. Daniel looked at him. What about everyone else? The echo smiled. Everyone else is temporary. The 9th bell rang. Ding. The 10th. Ding. Daniel raised the key. The echo attacked. They fell to the ground. The key slipped away. Aiko grabbed it. She ran toward the door. The echo caught her. Daniel shouted, "Aiko!" She looked back. Then she threw the key. Daniel caught it. The 11th bell rang. Ding! Daniel inserted the key into a small hole that suddenly appeared in the black door. The door began shaking. The echo screamed. No! The 12th bell rang. Ding! One bell remained. Daniel turned the key. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. Aiko screamed. You have to say your name. Daniel didn't understand. Why? Because the door needs to know who is closing it. The 13th bell began to ring. Ding! Daniel shouted, "My name is Daniel Carter." The key turned, the black door began collapsing. The echo screamed and Aiko smiled, but just before the door closed, she stepped through. Daniel shouted, "Aiko!" The door slammed shut. Silence. To be continued, episode 9, The Last Photograph. The village was silent. The echoes were gone. The black door had disappeared, and Aiko was nowhere to be found. Daniel searched the temple. Nothing. Hiroshi told him it was over. But Daniel didn't believe him. He searched for Aiko until sunrise. Finally, he found something beneath the temple. A photograph. It showed Aiko standing beside Daniel. But this photograph was different. It showed the two of them standing outside a modern city. Daniel recognized the location, Tokyo. Aiko was smiling. On the back of the photograph was a message, "I made it." Daniel stared at the words. Hiroshi came closer. "What does it say?" Daniel showed him. Hiroshi's face became pale. "That's impossible." "Why?" "Because if Aiko crossed over..." He stopped. Daniel asked, "What?" Hiroshi looked toward the mountains. "Something else may have crossed with her." Daniel immediately realized what he meant. The echo. He ran outside. The road had returned. His car was waiting exactly where he had left it. Daniel drove as fast as possible. Hours later, he reached the nearest town. People were walking normally. Cars were moving. Everything looked ordinary. Daniel checked his phone. Hundreds of messages had arrived, but one message frightened him. It came from his own phone number. The message contained a photograph. Daniel opened it. His blood went cold. The photograph showed him standing in Kurakami, but beside him stood the other Daniel, and behind them was Aiko. Daniel looked at the date. The photograph had been taken tomorrow. He stared at the screen. Then his phone rang. The caller ID showed his own name. Daniel answered. There was silence. Then his own voice whispered, "Don't go home." The call ended. Daniel looked toward the road ahead. For the first time, he realized something. Maybe the black door had closed. But that didn't mean the story was over. To be continued. The village was never gone. Daniel returned to America. He told nobody what had happened in Japan. Not the police, not his friends, not his family. He tried to return to normal life. For several weeks, nothing happened. Then one night, Daniel was editing his documentary footage. He found a video file he didn't remember recording. The file was only 3 minutes long. He pressed play. The screen showed Kurakami. The camera slowly moved through the empty village. Then it stopped in front of the temple. Aiko appeared. She looked directly into the camera. "Daniel," he froze. She continued, "You thought you closed the door." Daniel stood up. Aiko smiled, but the door was never in Kurakami. The screen went black. Then another image appeared. New York City. Daniel recognized the street. It was outside his apartment. Aiko whispered, "The door followed you." Daniel immediately looked toward his window. Nothing. He slowly walked closer. Then he saw it. Across the street stood a little girl, Aiko. Daniel ran outside, but when he reached the street, she was gone. Only a small photograph remained on the sidewalk. Daniel picked it up. It showed Kurakami. But the village was different. There were modern cars, electric lights, buildings, people from America, people from Japan, and standing in the center was Daniel. Next to him was Aiko. On the back was one final message. Kurakami was never a village. Daniel turned the photograph over. There was another sentence. "It is a doorway." Then Daniel heard a sound, a bell. Not from Japan, not from the mountains, from somewhere very close. Ding. He looked behind him. At the end of the street stood the black door, and someone was standing inside it, the other Daniel. But this time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood hundreds of people. The missing villagers, the missing children, people who had disappeared for hundreds of years. And in front of them stood Aiko. She looked at Daniel. Then she smiled. "You finally understand?" Daniel asked. "Understand what?" Aiko pointed behind him. Daniel slowly turned around. The entire city had disappeared. There was only darkness and a village, Kurakami. Daniel realized the terrible truth. The village had never been erased from the map. It had been erased from time, and now it was spreading. The bell rang one final time. Ding! The screen went black. 3 words appeared. The door is open. The end. Or perhaps the beginning.